Welcome back to another podcast of Printing's Alive with me, Warren Werbit, your host. I hope you enjoyed the podcast and the series. I'm here to just bring the world of print to you with everyone involved from all aspects, all kinds of print, and more importantly, just all about the people. Today, I have a special guest. I have Mark Hahn of Graphic Arts Advisors, whose specialty is actually, Mark, why don't you just welcome first of all?
Thanks, Warren.
And why don't you give us a little lowdown on who you are and what you do?
All right. Well, Mark Hahn, Senior Managing Director of Graphic Arts Advisors. We're a boutique financial advisory firm specializing in mergers and acquisitions in the printing, packaging, and related industries. Related typically means mailing because mailing and printing have come together. Also, a little bit of dose of digital advertising sometimes gets in there. But as I like to say, if somebody's putting ink on something somewhere, we're probably interested and we're probably qualified. If there's no ink involved, we're probably not interested and we're probably not qualified. So that's the blinders that we have on in terms of our practice. Personally, I got into the printing industry as a youngster. I ran presses, went into sales, sold printing, started a printing company, ran it for 10 years, sold it 22 years ago. I'm making this quick, Warren. I don't want to get into too much of the weeds.
It's all good.
Then was a CFO, Chief Financial Officer of another printing company, and then started Graphic Arts Advisors about full-time about 10 or 12 years ago. And so that's who I am. I have partners, three of whom are ex-printing company owners, as am I. And one partner, John Hyde, is an attorney, non-practicing but licensed. And I can tell you what we do. So that's who we are. We also have a couple associates that we work with, one in my office and also a bookkeeper at another office. We work across the country, so we're national, primarily U.S.-centric, and Warren, some Canadian once in a while, but we're not global, so we're focused really on North America and mostly U.S. So that's who we are. So what do we do with that? Half of our business is sell-side representation. A quarter of our business is buy-side representation. That's what we call it. We're either representing a seller or a buyer. And a quarter of our business is a mixed bag of value assessments and special situations, which we can talk a little bit about that. That's essentially helping companies that are financially challenged. So that's who I am and what we do in a nutshell.
Awesome. Yeah, I've known you guys for a long time. I've dealt with John in the past, spoken with him in the past. He's been quite helpful. Today, we're going to talk only the good stuff. We're going to leave some of the rough stuff for another episode. But what I wanted to talk about with you is buying and selling, owners wanting to sell and maybe buy. Our industry is getting a little bit older. Not everybody has family in the business. Some do, some don't. Some want to be in, some don't want to know from it. But when I talk to other printers and I say to them, "Hey, what's your plan? Are you thinking of selling? What are you doing?" They could be late 50s and their 60s, and a lot of them are like, "I don't know." I said, "Have you spoken to anybody?" They're like, "No." And I just know from my own experience that when you want to go through the process, there's a lot to it. It's not just deciding that you want to sell, right? And then call somebody. And I would also say it's not something where two owners really get together to try to do the deal. It's my experience was it's always easier to have somebody fresh, from outside the circle assisting.
Well, I'm definitely a believer in having an intermediary involved because that's the business I'm in, and it works. And we're busy. So I know there's a need for it. It's a proven model. However, there are occasions where one owner knows another owner for many years and they maybe have friendly competition and they can do a transaction. So that does occur.
Harder, though.
It's less common. And what happens sometimes is the transaction doesn't happen. And then the seller finds themselves a year or two behind the schedule that they intended because they burnt up time really trying to do it on their own. So we do get some do-it-yourselfers that then come to us and say, "Hey, this didn't work." And curiously enough, sometimes the the buyer that they were working with will actually end up being the buyer. But after you run a process, the buyer knows there's a competitive environment. They know there's professional advisory services. And so they kind of get going and make an offer that makes sense. So an advisor can simply actually help the process through motivation.
Yeah. And the other thing with the advisor is, I think it just most importantly, it keeps the emotions down, because when people are owners, they could be quite emotional about how their business is and how they see it, right? But what I want to get into is, I want to sell my business. What's the first thing I'm going to do?
It really depends on your business. I know that's a non-answer, but if you're a highly successful business and you're clicking out EBITDA at 15% of revenue and you're growing at 5-10% a year, that's a different pathway than somebody who's, say, financially distressed or just treading water, moving along. So it really depends on where you are. Again, I know that's a non-answer.
Well, how about if we just put the context of the person has a decent business, the growth is there a little bit. There's no 5s and 10s a year annual growth.
Mm-hmm.
They're making some money. They've always been somewhat profitable. Their equipment is semi up to date, because we're always needing something anyways.
Yeah. First thing is decide that you really want to do this. And you talked about emotions. There's a concept that I use, which is what I call the emotional bridge. And people sell their company because they've crossed some kind of emotional bridge. They're either rich, they're either poor, they're sick, they're healthy, their spouse is saying enough already with these 60-hour weeks, or they're not going into work and they don't want that responsibility. You mentioned equipment. Equipment has come to the end of its life and it's time to sign on for another $1 million press or upgrade from offset to inkjet, whatever it is. There's some kind of bridge that you crossed in your career where you've decided it's time to sell. And that's an internal step. And I can tell you that there's no way that I can sell somebody on hiring us to sell their business. It just doesn't work that way. They have to decide for whatever their situation is, again, rich, poor, healthy, sick, whatever it is, something has changed where now they're ready to exit. And that's the first step, is crossing that emotional bridge. Once that happens, it really does depend on the business. If your bookkeeping is sloppy, then get your bookkeeping in order. If your bookkeeping is in order, but you've got customer concentration, figure out, maybe you need to go through a couple of years of adding some customers and show that you can do that. You might not be able to dilute the concentration, but at least you can show there's a pathway to it. Or if you have concentration, can you get a contract with that customer so you can show that it's going to transition with a sale? So it's really going to depend on your particular situation. If you're in an industry if your customers are in an industry that's in decline, maybe you need to, again, show that you can add customers in a new direction. So it's very situationally dependent.
And what would you say, though? I mean, I've spoken with a few people and I've looked in the past, but how should the company be really set up? Like your salespeople in order? Should you be having the latest accounting software, MIS software, production processes? Does that add value, take things away? Like, how do you get the best value going forward?
The best value is going to be because your company's profitable and growing. I mean, you can cut through all that other stuff. It's great. You can have worked for 35 years. You got a great brand name, but you're going to benefit the most by having a profitable company that's growing and you're showing that. And what you don't want to do is do a whole bunch of mechanics to boost your profit artificially in the year before you sell. Now, you might do some things. You might put off some equipment purchases. You may let go a salesperson who's non-productive. That's all good kind of house cleaning stuff to do. But making major changes that all of a sudden your EBITDA goes from 7 to 20% because you did all these cuts and everything, buyers are going to see right through that, and you're not going to get the benefit of it. In fact, it may be detrimental because you've now taken the future life out of your company. You've cut things that shouldn't have been cut. I don't know. Did I answer your question, Warren?
Yeah, it really, I guess what I'm hearing is depends on who the buyer is, depends on the company. Everybody should be as clean as they can because there are no secrets once people start diving in, right? So you don't, you shouldn't have the outside looking great unless the inside's, together as well.
Yeah, and if there are issues, be prepared to disclose those. Be prepared to talk about what the solution is. Everybody knows we have issues in business, but what are you doing about those issues? And we're kind of fast forwarding to the process, but if you have an issue and you're involved in a sale process, the earlier in the process you get it out, the better it is, because you don't want to go down a road and then have to backtrack. That's a difficult position for everybody involved.
Well, I think in life we all learn that when you are, speaking the truth and you're honest up front, it's always easier, right? Because
Yeah.
it just, and again, you can't hide anything. How long does it take, or how long is the transaction when you want to sell?
The standard answer is 6 to 9 months. That's the default answer. The truth is, it could be anywhere. We've done deals in, I'm not exaggerating here, 6 weeks during the time when COVID broke out, March to April 2020. Probably the quickest deal we ever did. We just had one where we went to market. We got offers right away. We're going to close tomorrow. And we just went to market. I think it was late August. Maybe it was even September. Other deals can take 4 years. Now you might go, whoa, 4 years. What's that about? Well, what's that about is COVID broke out. So you sit around. A great offer came in for the real estate. So the company's taken off the market for a year while that's digested. A major customer is lost, so the buyer backs away. There's a few bad months. We've had ones where a buyer backs away. We got to go back out to market. And in both cases, I can think of where that happened. We actually got a better offer when we went back out to market because things weren't as bad as maybe they looked at for those 2 months. So, 6 weeks to 4 years, that's a big range. But the standard answer would be 6 to 9 months is what you should expect. And you might want to say, realistically, set your sights on a year to get to closing and kind of be through the process. There's prep time. That's how I would answer that question.
Cool. And I guess we said about the buyer should start really thinking or bring it up as soon as he's thinking about it, I guess, instead of sitting on it and waiting, right? Or reach out to someone like yourself for a conversation. I guess, do you help people define what they want to do, or maybe they don't want to do it? Are you like a little bit like play the shrink a little with the owner sometimes?
Well, yeah, I guess half of my job is psychology, but I don't want to overdo that. The answer is that's not the heavy part of our business, is guiding people through their business structure. We're primarily M&A and transactional advisors is the bulk of our business. However, companies will hire us to do what we call a value assessment. We'll go through the process and we'll say, we think your company's worth X, you've got Y amount of debt, here's going to be and we run that down through what are the net shareholder proceeds. Because you could have a company that's worth $10 million, but if you're loaded with debt and you need new equipment, maybe your proceeds aren't going to be significant. And that's really the number that you want to look at is what are you going to get at the end of the process.
What's involved when you're doing an evaluation? What are you looking at? Because not everybody who sells knows all the different steps to take into their mind. They might leave out 1 or 2 lines, which then affect the number in a big way.
Well, we have a checklist that we've developed over the years of documents that we ask for. It's not too long. It's not too short. It's been honed over time to get us a reasonable picture of what we think is needed to establish what a value would be on an M&A value based on the market, what we're seeing. Now, so to kind of go back to your question, if we go through a value assessment process, people will say, well, I'm not ready then because I've got too much debt, or I really need to work on this EBITDA number, or my revenue went down last year and that doesn't look good. So we'll discuss those factors. And I've had plenty of owners say, you know what, I'll come back to you in 6 months or a year. Let me take care of these things. Another conversation we have over and over again with owners is what's the impact of net working capital requirements on owner net shareholder proceeds on a transaction? And the most common response I get to that question is what is that, and why am I thinking about that, and why do I need to think about that? Those are questions, and when we go through the numbers, owners will say, "Wow, if I manage my working capital just a little bit differently over the next year, I can I don't want to say radically, but I can change the proceeds that I'm going to get out of this business because I manage the working capital more tightly, and I can prove to a buyer that I was able to make the same EBITDA by managing that net working capital." And those are kind of arcane concepts when you're running a business on a daily basis. You're not thinking about that. And I can give you examples where that gets people, their light bulb goes off and they go, okay, I'm going to work on this for a year or two and then I'll sell.
Well, I've had done a couple acquisitions, and you learn a lot when you're doing acquisitions. You got to take into account, first of all, the other team. I've did one small acquisition where they had to sell. I mean, they didn't have to, but yes, they had to. And when they did, and the owners were included, I mean, they were almost sabotaging the deal after. It became toxic. So I had to, act quickly to get rid of one of them really quickly, and make the others understand that you guys were going down. We're not here to be bad. We're here to elevate everybody. And that in itself is a whole other process that you go through. And then the biggest thing that I went through, even when, the advisor with the valuations and everything, one of the other owners had in his head, he was adding up literally all the hours he worked in his life and putting them on to the value. And it was hard
I've
to
heard this a lot of times, Warren. I've worked 35 years to build this company. It's got to be worth this. And I get that. But that's not what buyers are buying. They're buying the future. They're not buying the past. So the value has to be transferred at the closing, and the buyer's going to say, what is this going to do for me as the buyer? And, hopefully a buyer is respectful about that 35 years. But they're not paying for that 35 years. They're paying for the future performance of the company. And that's what you need to show.
Right. And if you set your company up right, or you're in a niche, or you're doing something particular, you're adding more value because they have it going forward.
Yes,
right?
Yeah, it has to be about the future value. And to your point about the people sabotaging things, there are three primary things you want to think about when in an acquisition context. These are very broad categories. You want to think about the money, you want to think about the strategic position of the company, and you want to think about the people or the culture or the social environment of that company. And I can tell you that most buyers and sellers think about those things in that order. They think about the money, then they think about the strategy, does this fit? And the last thing they think about is the people. We hear a lot of lip service about people, but when it gets down to it, that's what they're thinking about. However, I can tell you when you do a look back on most of these transactions, it's the opposite. It may be a tie between the people and the strategy because both of those have to be right. But typically it's the people. If the people are wrong, you should walk away from a deal as a buyer or seller. Don't kid yourself that any amount of strategy or money is going to make it work. You got to have the right people. Strategic fit is critical. And then at the end of the day, I don't want to, people make different amounts of money in this business, but I'll just throw out a round number. $10,000 or $100,000 spread over 5 years in a purchase agreement is not going to change pretty much anybody's life in this business. So you really want to focus on those other factors and then work out the best financial deal.
Oh, for sure. So yeah, I would tell you one of my experiences and one of the acquisitions that I had done was, first of all, you get excited. And the minute you get excited, you need to have somebody, I think you need to have somebody with you who's not attached to anything, who not emotional, could think things through and guide you. So in one instance, I got really excited about the whole prospect of what the deal was, who they were, their reputation, and I made some big fundamental mistakes. One of the mistakes I made was the people, not really doing enough, not really getting to know them or understand them well enough, even the managers say, because you can't deal with everybody. And then I'm going to say the biggest mistake I made is when I looked at the customer list, I didn't go out and check enough and verify that they are who they are. There was a lot of customers on that list that were great names that got me excited that hadn't given them an order in 2 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there's a due diligence process, and I'm not meaning to underplay the value of getting the best deal for your company, but there's a term that you want the best and highest value for your company, and that highest part is the soft part that defines the other factors that are maybe not the top dollar, but it's a better deal for you for reasons of deal structure. Maybe the money sooner or later, depending on what is important to the seller. So you really want to look at all those factors in a deal. And I guess to your point, yes, having an advisor who's objective and not involved is, I can say things that maybe the seller or the buyer don't want to hear.
And it's needed. So let me ask you: a person's decided that they want to do something. They've brought in the right advisor. What's involved with due diligence? Because that's really where it all starts and ends, or should.
Well, it's all over the place. You can have a due diligence is the process, for people who don't know, is the process of the buyer examining the seller. And in our process, we tell sellers, once you've signed an asset purchase agreement or a letter of intent and you intend to go to a closing, it's the buyer's right to ask any question they want, and you should answer that question. In due diligence, it's what's they saying, kimono's open. You really have to show everything. But in terms of the actual process, you can get everything from an 80-page document that has questions that are, one, ridiculous, but also may have the same question 4 or 5 times in the document because they've cobbled together this list of questions from various documents they've received. And that can be very frustrating, and you feel like somebody on the other side hasn't done their job. That's one extreme. The other extreme is, and this is more likely from a strategic buyer, another printer buying a printing company, where the due diligence is really quite light. And as you say, they're excited about the deal. They know each other. The finances seem right, and they just say, let's make this happen and get a deal done. And they're not asking a lot of questions or a lot of deep dive. Somewhere in the middle of that, between the disorganized, non-professional 100-page list of questions and the local strategic who really kind of does a comfort deal, the private equity buyers will do a pretty deep dive. And there'll be a lot of questions, and they may want to do a quality of earnings report where they basically recreate your P&L and really kind of acid test a lot of the assumptions that they've made, but they want to see the documents and trace those documents from beginning to end. So, and for example, I did a deal with a Canadian public company and was the buyer. And as a public company, they don't want egg on their face. They don't want to be going to their shareholders later and saying, oops, we made a mistake.
Right.
A private company, you can go home and say, oops, I made a mistake, but they couldn't do that. So the due diligence was pretty rigorous. Private equity buyers, the due diligence is going to be pretty rigorous. So, strap on your seatbelt, get ready. It's going to be a ride.
So if you're doing something like that, would you say that the payout could be a little bigger in general if it's equity buyers versus, say, a competitor? Like, how does you get more money from one group over another?
It's a great question. It's going to be so based on the situation. I mean, private equity firms are spending other people's money.
Well,
So
actually, they're probably spending your money. They're paying you. Your company takes out the loan and has to pay it back.
yeah, so
Well, right?
well, if they re-leverage the company,
Right.
but yes, yeah, it's a leverage buyout at some point. They're using debt to in the capital structure, but so they might be able to pay a little more, but they're going to be very disciplined about that process. Um, a strategic buyer, classically, the understanding was strategic buyers paid more because there were synergies, but I don't think that's any longer true. It's situational. If you get the right strategic buyer who says, I need this company in this city that does this work, well, an extra turn on EBITDA solves a lot of problems for them,
Right.
and they might be willing to go to that level. So it's
Yeah.
really going to depend. That's not a great answer, but it's the right answer.
Right. I mean, I've seen some bigger companies gobble up some smaller ones and almost pay dollar for dollar on the revenue. Bigger companies meaning big cash or public, or I mean, is it because it's the easiest way that they're going to get the bulk volume that they need for a
Well,
story?
I've seen dollar for dollar on the revenue, but let's do the numbers. If you're a high performing company and your EBITDA is 20% and you're high performing and maybe your revenue was 20, 30 million. So now you're up in that middle range of printing companies. You're not down at the under 10 million. So maybe you get a 5 times EBITDA. Well, 5 times 20% is 100%. So there you are at 1 times revenue. So you hear those stories about companies that get that, but there's some mathematics behind that. It wasn't based on revenue. It was based on that EBITDA
On
and
how
that
they work.
performance
Wow.
and where they are in the market.
You mentioned 5 times value. What is there a standard number out there today? Because in the last little few years, it seems like it was all over the place. Or label businesses were high demand, going through the roof. Offset companies less so, and then find a niche guy with offset packaging, and then it's back up through the roof.
Well, you've kind of answered your own question. It really depends on the segment, the size, the growth rate, uh, even the location. What's the future prospects for it? Uh, and there's that the the attribute of this whole process that kind of hurts the people at the low. It hurts their feelings at the lower end of the market. Is if their EBITDA is down at 7 or 8, 9%, and they're not growing, they're not going to get a high multiple. And then they see somebody who's growing that has a higher EBITDA who gets a higher multiple on a higher number. So that there's that exponential escalation of business value. But you have to be performing in order to get those numbers. So, to answer your question, the ranges are all over the place depending on the segment. And I didn't mention in the intro that I've researched and written the monthly target report for the last 14 years, which I should have mentioned.
Well, I was going to eventually bring it up anyways.
Well, thanks,
It's an important report that you do. It gives a really good view of what's going on in M&A, or how it's going and who's buying who and size of company. You could get a good feeling for.
Yeah, and what we talk about in that are more industry trends that we're looking at based on M&A transactions, as well as closures and bankruptcies and so forth. But and that's by segment, because the label business is not the commercial printing business, is not the direct mail business, is not the folding carton business. We're all putting ink on something somewhere, but those are not the same businesses.
No, the label business is good.
Yeah, although the market has cooled off a little bit for label businesses since.
And why would you say that? Too many, too much capacity.
There was such a hot market fueled by the PE firms, and they cherry picked a lot of the firms that were 20, 25 million in revenue, really doing really well. You've had the whole evolution of flexography from a backwater process back when I was in the business to doing beautiful work on flexible packaging. So you've got a technology change, you've got growth, and as we all know, packaging is a reoccurring revenue. So that people who want to invest in businesses like that. And so those values are just disconnected from the commercial print market.
Have you been involved in any ESOPs or employee purchases of the business?
We have.
So tell me about that because that almost sounds interesting. The employees that work obviously, have some input, get something at the end if there's a benefit. How does it work for the owner when he's selling first, and then you can tell me about the employees?
Owners can do very well because it's a tax advantaged process. An ESOP's basically a trust that's a retirement plan. So if it's done correctly, and there's a lot of rules, the owners can benefit by selling the company and having tax advantage proceeds from that sale. It's going to be situationally dependent. But if somebody calls me up and it's a $2 million or $3 million a year revenue company and they've heard about ESOPs, it's too expensive. The reporting requirements, the trustee requirements. What I tell people, right or wrong, it's what I heard and what I believe, is that to really consider transitioning to an ESOP company, you should be revenue roughly 15 million and above, and EBITDA 15% or thereabouts. And if you're not clicking down those numbers, you're probably going to be floored by the cost of putting one of these plans together and then running it every year.
So tell me quickly, what's the cost, just so people know and they have a good understanding? What's the cost of putting it together, and then what's the cost of, managing it throughout the year at the end of the year?
Well, it's going to depend on the company, but six figures would be.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
You don't. ESOPs are complicated, and they are trust arrangements that are retirement plans. So there's a lot of rules around retirement plans, as there should be.
And does the owner walk away with cash at that time?
Sure.
Like is the company borrowing money from the bank to pay out the owner, or partial, or
Yeah,
where does the cash
there's
come?
typically a loan. So ESOPs tend to have a lot of debt when they're formed, and so one of the questions I ask when an ESOP contacts us about buying a company is how long have they been an ESOP? Because if they've been an ESOP for 6 months, they probably still have a lot of debt that they need to
Right.
pay down. But if they've been an ESOP for 10 years, they're probably well into paying down that loan. And there's a lot of nuances about these that it's not for the faint of heart, and it's not something you want to do without really good professional advisors.
So when you say six figures, is that because you have a lot of outside professionals coming in to do things and to manage, or is it internal? Is it your CFO, or is it your auditing firm?
Outside professionals.
Outside.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And the employees benefit in that they receive, when the company's making money, dividends every year. Is it the loan paid off by the operation and the employee never pays anything out of their pocket?
Well, by definition, an ESOP is a retirement plan. So there's a vesting schedule, just like
Right.
other plans that companies have, and that vesting schedule is defined. So employees who are there for that certain amount of time enjoy the value of that portion of the equity that they're entitled to based on that vesting plan. And then when they retire, they sell their stock back to the ESOP, or it's redeemed, I think would be the proper word. And so it's a form of retirement plan.
Wow. Sounds complicated. And then it kind of feels like you're going to retire waiting for counting on other people.
Well, you are. You're counting on yourself if you're an employee. The idea is that it motivates employees to work harder to increase that value.
When an owner decides to take that route, is he staying on for a long time? Is he vacating the building? Because when you sell your company, from what I've seen, is most people don't last that long.
The ones that I'm aware of, the owners have stayed on. and typically part of the ESOP funding comes from the owners in the form of seller debt.
Right.
So the
Okay.
sellers are motivated to stay on and perform and help pay down themselves, so to speak.
Wow. And how many do a lot of companies do that, or is it a popular avenue?
I think it's kind of spotty. I mean, there's a few in the printing industry. There's a couple in the printing industry that were bought. It's effectively a transaction. You're selling to a trust that's created as a
Right.
retirement plan to buy the company stock, and that have gone ESOP, to use that term, and then have then sold out of the ESOP structure.
And to
And
do that, it doesn't. That's just a regular transaction.
well, you need ESOP trustee approval. There's an approval process,
Right.
and some of them have been quite good for the employees.
Oh, I would think what a great way to motivate people. It's
It's it, but if it goes down, it's not so good.
no, it's no good for anybody,
Yeah. So
right? It's got to be so also with selling businesses, you have families. And in some businesses, sometimes the family or the children will take it over. In other cases, not. In other cases, maybe the father doesn't want to sell it to the kids. Like, do you come across that? And what happens in those cases?
yeah, the biggest issue we see is that when a company becomes very valuable, it can be hard for the children to fund that transaction. And if the husband and wife who built the company are looking for a certain amount at an exit, it's difficult. Um, we
Wow.
have seen some situations where the owners transition ownership to the next generation over time, and that maybe works better.
And I guess the kids, parents are still there to teach them a little and make sure that
Yeah,
it's still
there's
running and
there's a transition process.
they're not giving up the reins.
Mhm.
Is the M&A activity busy now?
Yes.
Because it was busy a little while. Did it slow down in the last couple years a little,
It,
or
it, it did. There was a time period, and we're out of that now, which is why I think it's busy, uh, where a lot of companies had a fair amount of liquidity on their balance sheet from all the government money. So you had a couple, and also there was the post-COVID demand curve that just shot up.
right?
And there was the paper shortage, which gave printers a window of pricing opportunity. So it's kind of ironic, but you had companies with strong balance sheets, strong earnings, and owners expected this huge bump up in value. And of course, buyers are going, well, you
It's
had a
fake.
couple of really lousy years in COVID, and I'm not going to pay you for this 1 year because it's been so good. And so we had some sellers that were kind of discouraged by the market response to their inflated expectations. That's
Well, I
kind of,
think you. Sorry, I was gonna say I think you kind of got to know if you're the seller that if you put yourself in the you always have to put yourself in the place of the buyer to think about what they're thinking on how you're gonna maybe present things or how you want to. But I even I'm just thinking like how many times people have great runs and then that's why you go an average 4 years and not two.
yeah, our kind of default position is a weighted 3 year average. So that's just, but if they're doing political, we use a 4 year average. So, uh, but that's kind of run its course now. The PPP money and I don't know what it was called in Canada, but in the US it was the PPP money and the ERC credits.
I think in
Huge.
Canada it was just called free money from our stupid government.
Yeah,
But
well, so of course we had all the impacts. We won't get into that from all that free money, but that's kind of been wrung out of the system now. They're still there, but it's gone, most of it. Um, and so now we have sellers coming to market with more reasonable expectations. And we also have buyers with strong balance sheets. The buyers who kept that cash uh,
right.
are now in a good position. So there's kind of a nice market right now.
Oh, good.
The other thing that
So,
we've come across, and this goes back to, um, I can really date it to May 2023. As you know, a quarter of our business or thereabouts is helping companies that are financially challenged. I know that's another video. Maybe we'll get John Hyde on a video with you, which he's our expert in that. But that part of our business has ramped up tremendously since, again, May 2023. It just like somebody opened the gates and we started to get distressed transactions. And
well,
that's,
I think that has, sorry, to do with the end of COVID, money running out, the fairy tale ending,
yeah,
market conditions.
yeah. So, and that hasn't stopped, so that's a pretty steady drumbeat. And that's a whole different transactional structure. It's a whole different service offering. So again, it's a different conversation, but it's
Mhm.
worth noting that we've seen an uptick in that activity.
Yeah, I don't think there's any printing company that hasn't experienced in their journey the peaks and valleys, right? And if you, for me too, if you remember what happened in the valley, and you end up on the peak, and as you go into the valley, it's going to be a different valley because you don't want to make the same mistakes twice,
Yeah.
right? And you want to learn. So, in all the M&A and all the thinking and evaluations and whatnot, I think there's one area that people are generally a little shocked with, and that's the cost at the end. It's the cost of paying their advisor, whatever the percentage is. I was blown away on the professional fees, right? Between the accountants and the due diligence and all the numbers and their time,
Mm-hmm.
and then the lawyer with whatever it is that the lawyers kind of do, and they're setting you up. No, I used to make jokes about lawyers, but you need the lawyer.
Yeah, well,
But
you're bringing up a really good point, and this happens over and over again. And I would urge people to not do this. And what I say when I give a talk at a print show, or whatever, is don't hire Uncle Charlie. And Uncle Charlie is my euphemism for the attorney that you've trusted through your whole career. Uncle Charlie, and maybe he's a relative, maybe he's not, or she uh, has done your real estate transaction. They helped with your corporate documents, your formation documents. They helped you with your loan documents, and you've really got this trusted relationship that goes back 30 years. Well, you've got a couple problems here. One, Uncle Charlie doesn't understand M&A transactions, and he or she is going to make stupid corrections to the asset purchase agreement or the stock purchase agreement, and it's going to eat up time and money because they don't know what they're doing. They don't understand what's normal in these transactions. They're also going to burn time, and we've had deals actually that have fallen apart because Uncle Charlie, again to use that term, has literally burnt through 2 or 3 months. We had one once where the guy literally, I knew I was in trouble when I was working for the seller in this case, and he told me that they couldn't review the documents because he was in traffic court that week or something like that. I said, oh boy, we're in trouble. And it added, the deal fell apart. We got it back together a year later and we got the deal done. But literally, he blew the deal because he couldn't respond. And so the problem is that they're not thinking about that it's a different advisor for this type of transaction. Depends on the size of the company and the trusted advisor, to use the proper term for Uncle Charlie, might be somebody who really is qualified, but you really want to know that in advance. And the problem is that I can say that till I'm blue in the face, but our clients typically will then say, yeah, but not Uncle Charlie. He's got this. He told me he's done transactions. And then 4 months later, they're saying, Mark, I should have listened to you. So that's an issue. So
I'm sure.
spend the 30, 40, 50 on a real top-notch transactional attorney, if depending on the size of your company. Maybe it's
No, of course.
5,
Well,
maybe it's 10.
you want to be with the people that are smart and know what they're doing, and it's
Yeah,
not hard to find out who they are.
And experienced in transactions.
Well, it could be said for everybody and everything that they do, right? In our own world of print, when you keep things at the high level, high quality,
Mm-hmm.
right? You like the finer things. You don't change the way you think on that side when you go over there, or how I could save some money.
Yeah.
Those are not the transactions where it's thinking about saving the money. It's about making the right decisions, because with the right guy, you will have more money at the end,
Typically, yes.
right? I mean,
And
that's how you
I
always.
threw out a number, but that number might not be applicable to a company with $4 million of revenue. So I don't want to scare people off with a number that I just threw out, which is really for a bigger transaction. So, but
Well, I've done some transactions where, the lawyer bill is 25, 30 grand, 35 grand for whatever he's doing back and forth, and the accountant is doing whatever they're doing.
mhm.
Although I will touch on something really funny. It's not really about M&A, but we're talking lawyers and reading. So I recently just had a contract from someone to look at, and I joked to them and said, do I need a lawyer? And they said no. And I looked at it and I thought, okay, maybe I do need someone to look at it. And I put it into Chat GPT that I pay for, and I asked it to be my advisor, and just to point out the good, the bad, and the ugly, and what I should think about. And
Mhm.
I kid you not, I saved at least $2,000 on the lawyer just to read it, because they charge you for the time to read it. And what it put out, I've done enough stuff to be able to read it, and know that it's a good starting point. Blown away. Went back to the other people. I said, hey, I'll be straight up. This is what I did. They looked at it. They're like, whoa.
Wow.
So it's not to cut out the lawyer. It's to save a little bit of money in the beginning, right? For what you're doing. And then the other thing is, when I did that, it's what I learned when I did that. Because I wouldn't normally learn. The lawyer gives me back something. I just kind of read it.
Yeah,
And here,
at the end of the day, it's all about being efficient. So whether it's Chat GPT or getting the right attorney, you want to get the deal done. You want to have the right toolkit. No
oh, for
question
sure.
about
I'm
it.
just saying people could use chat in the beginning a little bit to get ahead before they sit down. Or even if they're going to sell, they can go in and ask it, give me the full list of what I'm supposed to do, so that when they do sit with the advisor, they're a little bit pre-versed in some of the
That's
terminology.
interesting. I'll have to play that one out and see how what comes out.
Yeah, I just found in certain situations, it just helps me even on a legal side understanding. Even just, and then I'll move on from that one. But like even NDAs, lawyer would charge you $1,000 for an NDA that he just changed your name in. You don't need that anymore. So different ways, but always been a believer. Even when I was selling print, the people would come to me because we were the best at what we did, which we did it really well. And you get what you pay for in the end most of the time,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because people hold themselves like that. It's um, it's just important to just always do the right thing. How many transactions fail, or what percentage do you think fail of what started?
Define fail for me.
Don't go through.
Probably 10 or 15%. I'm just doing some quick math in my head. And for all kinds of reasons.
It could be anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, okay, last question. When they do transactions, do the selling party stay on? If they do, for how long? Generally, do they last the duration of the time that they said they would be there?
As always, the
Really,
answer
because after they have no say, so to speak.
after
It's
it
it's
depends. The big successful owner who exits typically doesn't last long. I think the statistics are less than a year. But the salesperson owner who wants another 5 years in a career tends to last because they've got their lane to stay in and they're successful at it. I've talked to buyers who will point out to me that they've done 5 acquisitions and 4 of those 5 owners are still with them doing something.
I
So
guess depends what their position is. And you know what? I would think that for the person selling who gets some cash, whatever amount it is, and then really doesn't want to do nothing, what a great opportunity to be doing what you love to do without any of the pressure and liability. I mean, unless you have a payout or an earnout at the end. But it's pretty, it's little, it's a nice way to end lighter than buying a $4 million machine to keep the business going, right?
What
While
I
you're
might
there because
what
you
I
need
might
it.
say, Warren, is that it's difficult for the type A personality, if
Hmm.
we can use that term, to stay on for long.
I would agree with that.
Yeah,
Just me being
that's
me. Hmm.
yeah, that's the person that kind of chafes at the whole thing and has to leave.
Yeah, I could see that being, well, from my own perspective, I could see it being pretty tough, pretty tough.
Yeah.
But, and would you say most people are happy at the end, buyers, sellers, when they do the transactions?
Yes, but sometimes it takes a few months. Um, it's almost like postpartum depression, if you know that term.
Mm-hmm.
Find that sellers, they're very focused. They want to retire, and uh, they've got a goal. Maybe there's cash plus an earnout, and a couple weeks after the closing, they're typically, this is a broad brush, but they're unhappy because they just let go of their baby,
Maybe.
so to speak. And uh, oh, that's it. But then a few months later, like, this is what I needed to do. This was the right decision. I made, I got the transaction I expected. I said yes to it. I'm okay. Same buyers, maybe less so, but we have had buyers who've come back to us and say, a month later, this is a disaster. Why did I do this?
Right.
Talk to them
I've done that.
a year or two later, and they say, you know what, that worked out. We got some good customers. We had to change some things around. It wasn't 100% what we thought we were getting into, but we're glad we did it. And there's a real good residual value that we still have in our new company, or the bigger company. So there's kind of this natural human emotional curve that goes on. Probably
Well, I
not what
will.
people want to hear, but that's sort of,
Well, you know what? I want people to hear the truth. I want people to hear the way it really is. I've done in a couple acquisitions that I've done. I mentioned one before we were like sabotaged by the former owner and maybe some of the people. But it's the heart. You learn the most in an acquisition when you bring two companies, two groups together, because it never really is what you had before, right? And it's not what they had before, and you're kind of recreating a new culture and a new mantra for people to work on it. It's it's like I'll even say, just as a divorced guy, when I was with somebody else, it's like a blended family. It's you hope it's great, but it takes work, and you
yeah.
can't go in with the
And
wrong expectations.
some common mistakes are people let a us versus them culture develop within, and you have to work hard to avoid that. And that can be really difficult if you're bringing people together in the same plant. If you're maintaining a
Right.
different brand in a different facility, well, that's one thing. But if you're taking a company and everybody feels very emotionally strong about that company, and you're tucking it in, you're getting rid of the name, and you keep telling people, I've seen this happen. Well, your company failed, so we're going to do everything our way. That's probably a mistake. There was probably some good value there that you could learn from and incorporate. So you want to avoid that
Oh,
us versus them. And
you could have a 3-hour podcast on merged entities after and people and cultures,
yeah, there's a
because
different
it's
conversation here, and I'm probably not the right person to have it. Is the post-closing transition process, and our firm doesn't get involved in that so much. So we get to a closing and everybody's happy. We walk away, we get our fee. Um, if it's a distress situation, then we're involved to help figure out where to
right.
put the pieces. But in a successful company M&A process, typically we're out of the picture. But there's a need for uh, a consulting company that helps with post-closing transitions. And I suspect they're out there. Be
Well,
nice to have one in the engineering industry.
I would have used one had I known better,
I know,
because
but the issue
it
is,
would have made the pain a lot easier.
Okay, but it's now you've gone through a closing, you've spent all these fees that you've spoken about. And
Hmm.
now the M&A advisor says, "Hey, Warren, I'm out of the picture, but you should hire this firm that's going to help you with the transition, and it's going to be another X amount of dollars." You're probably exhausted spending money at this point, and you just want this to happen. There are a lot of things in transition. Again, I'm not the right person to do it, but there's a need for that service.
Well, my biggest experience in business has been if you need to hire somebody to move things along, to recreate, cultures, people, etc. It is so important and it is so worth it with the right person, right? Because the quicker you can get from A to B with minimal aggravation, interruption, everybody then just comes together and then everybody's rowing the boat in the same way, or most people in the same way.
Yeah, I mean,
Otherwise,
there
it's
are
painful.
people in the industry who do that. I don't know that they
Hmm.
particularly do transition consulting, but they certainly would be helpful. I don't want to name any names, but
Yeah, no, no, no. Yeah, no,
I can think
perfect.
of a couple people that if somebody called me, I could say, "Well, call this person or that person," and they probably could help you with this process.
Oh, I think anybody can call anybody who's done any acquisitions and brought companies together for a little top 10 on what to do or what not to do right away to keep the ship moving and keeping it upright.
Yeah, but
Otherwise, it's like you're in some rough waters. But yeah, it's a never ending learning, right? When you're doing this type of stuff.
at minimum, put together an internal transition team.
Yeah, and regardless of your size, you have to do something,
Yeah,
right? You have to have even a liaison person just within
yeah,
that works and goes with.
yeah.
Wow. Anyways, wow, time flies. Uh Great if that's for me, take a message. Yeah, no, great conversation, super insightful. I think these conversations need to be had because more and more people want to do transactions, don't know what it is. I think when you want to do a transaction, I think you have to educate yourself a little bit before to know what you're going into, or the up and the down and the journey is a lot bumpier, or it could be
Yeah, well,
longer.
what we didn't talk about on this call, and I'm happy to talk about it with anybody at any time, really, is what are the particulars of the process? What does the process look like? And because it's a defined process, it's not rocket science,
Well, you know
but
what? Let's take some time.
but,
I'm in no rush,
but it's a
and let
defined
let people
process.
hear what is the process.
All right, I have to watch my time as well, Warren.
Hmm.
So just uh, in a nutshell, okay, because it's really a longer conversation than we're going to have
Absolutely.
here. But when you hire an advisor is going to put together marketing materials. And they're typically going to put together something called a teaser. That's a document that describes the company that's for sale, but it's not identified. So this goes out to a broad base. It could be an approved base, but it's a base of prospective buyers that are going to look at this and say, is this interesting to me? Then the next thing that's put together is something called a confidential information memorandum, or the book it's called sometimes, or CIM, CIM for short. That's a lot of details. Typically would be 50 to 100 pages. That's got a lot of detail about the company, financial information, customer information. We typically don't name the customer names in that, but we do. We call them customer A, customer B, customer C. But buyers are going to want to know, is there customer concentration or is there customer diversity? What's the trend from those top customers? What's it look like over the last 3 years? What industry are those customers in? All that's identified in the CIM. Where is the company? Where is the building? Is the building for sale? Is the building for lease? Uh, how big is the building? Uh, all that information. Why are they selling? What's the motivation for selling? Who are the principals? What is their background? What's the second level management? What do they do? Who are they? Again, there's different levels of information for different size companies and different preferences. Uh, and so that's all put together. The next thing you put together is a list of prospective buyers. In our process, we get that pre-approved by the sellers. Other people just broadcasted. I don't know somebody else's process, but I know what our process is.
Right.
So we work with a pre-approved list. We also put forth and that's, why would somebody hire us versus a general broker or investment banker in their community? Because we know the industry. I dare say we probably have the best database in the industry of investors and owners in the printing, packaging, and related industries. If not the best, we're certainly there. And relationships, widespread relationships throughout. We talk to owners and investors every day throughout the industry. These different segments: printing, packaging, mailing, so forth. So we can put together that list of prospective buyers, not just as a shotgun approach, but in a specific,
from knowing,
using the knowledge of the business.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to send a wide format opportunity to a high volume web offset printer unless you happen to know that they're interested in getting into the wide format business, that's that relationship.
But you don't want to waste being the wrong time in the wrong place for the wrong reason. It's
you want to think through. So we do that. We also have an NDA, which is well vetted by dozens of attorneys, so we provide that. And then you go to market. You get responses, you solicit offers, you advise. One of the things that I have found is that owners will hire our firm because they think we know somebody. And we do. But 6 months later, after we've gone through the process, and it is a process, I've had several owners say to me, it's going to sound a little immodest, and it's not just about me, it's about my partners as well.
It's the team.
And we always work two principles on every engagement. So it's not just ever me. It's always me and Michael, me and John, me and Mitch, me and Rod. It's always two of us together on every engagement. And we do that for a couple of reasons. One, we do a peer review internally. But two, this decision, when an owner has crossed the emotional bridge to sell, is one of their most important decisions. They don't want to hear that I'm on vacation or John or Michael's on vacation and that's fine, but they want to be able to reach somebody and say, what's up, or get good advice. So I've had owners call me 6 months later and say, I hired you, effectively what they're saying, because I thought you knew somebody. But what I really came to value at the end of the process was you and your team's advice along the way to get me through a close. And that's when they don't mind the fee. When they say, okay, you got me here. And it wasn't just, this is not like the real estate brokerage business where is there a dog there? I see a tail wagging and everything.
It's Wally on the wall is sitting right here beside me. He just got off the bed.
It's not like the brokerage business where you take a listing and throw mud up against the wall and hope that something sticks. It's a disciplined process to accomplish a goal.
So, well, I was going to say before when you were talking, I think in our industry, or maybe every industry, you need to go with the people that know the industry, because if they don't know the industry, they don't know the ins, the outs. They don't know, the lingo on the other side. And then it just takes longer to do. And I find there's even more complications.
I mean, that's the philosophy that we've used at Graphic Arts Advisors, because we have blinders on, and it makes a huge difference for us and our clients. There are other people who would rather hire the investment bank that's in their city, who needs to learn the business, and that's okay too if that's what they decide to do. But we've obviously taken this approach where we're not industry agnostic, we're industry specific.
Yeah, no, that would be my preference. Okay, so we went off a little, which was great because I think that was really important for people to hear and to know. First of all, what a session! Love M&A, love hearing about it because you're always learning something new. There's always something different, and times are always changing. So when the times change, the way people do things change, the operation, the process. What few words would you have for anybody out there who's thinking about possibly, wanting to unload their business?
Well, that's a loaded term.
Oh, I'm just using
So
different words.
that's why
Sell their business for high profit.
everybody loves this term lately. They want to exit ownership. I mean, that's become a
Right.
popular term in the last 10 years. Uh, I mean, this is going to sound self-serving, and it is talk
You're
to an
allowed.
advisor, whether it's, what's that?
I said you're allowed.
Yeah, whether it's me or somebody else, one of my partners or somebody else who does what we do, talk to somebody about the process. They should be willing to have a conversation with you up front about what the process is like, what the costs are, and what's going to happen through the process. And because it will be a little bit of a roller coaster. And
To say the least.
and be prepared for some lows and some highs throughout the process for sure.
What's what's something that they should stay away from or not do it or just a quick, because everybody's quick on, yeah, I want to sell or I want, but
The the one, and I would call it a mistake that we see, is owners will get engaged in what I call a serial process. That's serial with an S, not with a C. And they'll entertain one. They really want to exit. They've got a 1 year or 2 year plan, and they think they know the perfect buyer. So they engage with that buyer, and they spend 4 or 5 months. Doesn't work out, and then they say, "Oh, well, that didn't work. I'm going to call that," and then they go through that. So, it's this serial process where they're going through one after the other. Before you know it, it's 2 years later, and they don't have a transaction completed. You really want to run a parallel process where you're going out to the market and touching various prospective buyers at the same time. Not only will you probably get a better offer, but you're more likely to get an offer done because we're all human. And part of the human dynamic is when it's a competitive situation, we up our game. And so buyers are no different. When they know they're in a competitive, and it doesn't, I'm not talking about a drag out, knockout fight, but if there's an advisor involved, they know immediately that it's a competitive situation. And therefore, they're going to up their game. And you're more likely to get a deal done. It's just the truth of it.
yeah, no, it's well, again, that's why people should refer to advisors for the right, I think, just for the help with the right way to do it and to avoid all the minutia stuff and wasting time, because the time flies quickly.
Yeah,
And the
I
more
tell
time you
people,
spend, more expensive it gets.
I tell people, if you're not going to hire our firm, we'll hire some firm. At least get an advisor to help you with the process. So that's a generic statement, even though it sounds like a pitch. It's definitely
No, no, I think it's great. I think everybody should. Listen, there's a reason that there's professionals in every different area, even when it comes to print. When I'm selling print and I go to a customer, I want the customer who wants me because I know what I know, and I'm going to save them the time, the energy, and we're going to get their brand on mark.
Yeah.
There's no secrets. Wow. Okay, we're gonna do this again because it's a never ending, and there's just like, as I'm doing this, I'm thinking of like 20 more things I'm thinking about in the process, and I'm thinking back to some of my experiences that I would like to share with some, because when you don't do good, it really does suck, and you don't want to make those mistakes again in any way.
All right,
So,
thank you so much for your time, Warren. I appreciate it.
So Mark, I want to thank you for your time, for
You're welcome.
all the information, everything you put out for us. To everybody else, I hope you walked away with something that you didn't know. And if you did know, maybe you just had some reconfirmation of the right things to do. It is a big process if you want to sell. It is a big process if you want to buy. My experience is you want to do it right because time is money. If anybody knows anyone who wants to be on the show, let me know. If anybody has anything they want to share that's good and good for people to learn and know, then let me know and we'll work that out. Otherwise, we'll see you again soon. Warren Werbit, printing's alive, and I love print. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Warren.